Yeah, this is what it's about. And notice the name is Disability Justice, and it's public policy. That's what I do is different than what other organizations do, and it's something that I think we need now. It's kind of like the next step. Everybody's had 30 years to comply with the ADA, and it's not happening. It's too slow, so we got to work on it. Anyway, a friend of mine described disability justice as being at a dance, and then disability justice is the equivalent of being asked to dance, so that you're a full participant in the event. And I think that's a pretty good summary of what it means. So I really like this quotation from President Biden, because it's current, and I think he gets at, it's a testament to our character as people, our character as Americans, that we live in a democratic society, and that in order to have a healthy democracy, got to have the involvement of everybody. Everybody's voice must be heard. Everybody's voice is important. And I like what he said here, because I think it gets at that very well. All right. The ADA, as you know, is it's a large bill. It covers a lot of things. And I'm glad it does, because everything is in one package. It covers education, accommodation, employment, things like privately owned spaces that are also open to the public, like stores, hotels, restaurants, things like that. All of those are expected to come into compliance, and it should have happened long before this. There's also transportation and internet access that's in the bill. But when this in the law, when the ADA was passed, nobody really knew where the internet was going to go. So it's still behind the times a bit. But if anybody wants to talk about that, we can talk about that. Okay, education and employment are in Title I. I think there's 6 titles. I don't remember, but each title covers a particular topic. And Title I is for education and employment. And this is really probably the strongest part of the ADA, because this is what is backed up by previous legislation. And it was done like this in order to expand on previous legislation, and to, I guess, reinforce it that, this is not something that's over and done with. This is something that's an ongoing process, and it's really part of our society, that we never are static. There's always changes. There's always something that needs to be done. So this is based, and I'll say roughly on, because there's many policies, procedures, and things like that, but on the Rehabilitation Act of 74 and on the Labor Relations Board. So there's a lot of resources that are available because those organizations already exist, like the Rehab Act is part of the Department of Education. And the Department of Education has resources in terms of staff. They have established policies and procedures. They also have attorneys, and the attorneys know education law very well, and they are very good at making sure that people with disabilities have their rights, have their rights, rather than having rights taken away by people who simply don't want to spend the money. The Labor Relations Board handles things that pertain to private employment, and to some extent public, because there are so many examples of employees in the public sector that have to go the route of making a complaint and maybe even going to court. Hopefully that doesn't happen a lot because it gets expensive. But I can give an example of one of the things that, because I want to get, and yeah, this is where, see, I told you, Sydney, this is where I could talk for hours. Because one of the things that's really important to me is that there's a huge group of people with disabilities, but not all of them understand what that means in terms of themselves and the kinds of issues that they should be interested in. And I want to do that expansion. That's what builds political power. The more people you've got who are vocal, the more political power you've got. And we need that in order to keep pushing ahead with stuff that really hasn't been done in the last 30 years. But one of the examples I like is the one about pregnancy. Pregnancy is covered by the ADA. It's not a disability, but it is a condition that impacts on a person's daily life and their ability to perform the kinds of things that they normally would. And I use that term carefully because what's normal to one person is not necessarily normal to another, obviously. But people who are pregnant, who have to stand all day, can't do it. And if they can't afford to take off work, which is true for most people, they can have some serious problems, some complications, and some serious problems with their health. And what the ADA covers
Let's talk about what's covered in ADA.
Yeah. So what's covered in ADA is that the person can go to the Labor Relations Board and they can say, I need accommodation. I need to be able to sit down. And that is so simple. Like with a cashier, you give them a stool to sit on. There are plenty of jobs that can be shifted around while someone is pregnant. And that's something that unfortunately you need a law to make it happen. And that's true for just about everything else. So the processes are set for employment and for education. And what I'll point out now is this is what Title I requires. First, the individual has to understand, yeah, I need an accommodation. And then they have to ask for it, and then they have to wait for it. And one example I'll give is like with a school, or like say the technical college, Milwaukee Area Technical College. The individual has to ask for an accommodation, and it could be anything, anything that will help them in their classroom and help them do the job they need to do in order to learn. So that might be a special kind of tablet or something because of the subject, who knows? Especially, I think with mathematics, that's what I think about a lot, because you can't just type out mathematics. You need to have some way to take notes. And that isn't always true. And sometimes that might mean having a person there to take notes. But you have to make a request, and you have to put the request in writing. And then you have to wait. And MATC has up to 6 weeks to respond. So think about that in terms of the semester. You've got to wait 6 weeks. Well, that's probably going to be the end of the semester. And that's one of the things that bothers me about this particular title. My thinking is that all the stuff that is required, that they know is going to come up, should already be somewhere in an office, so that we can say, okay, this is what we need this time around. And another example of that is that the court system in Milwaukee County, there are so many courtrooms. Not all of them are accessible. They simply aren't. And I know that from experience because I've been on juries. I've talked with the guy, I talked with John Barrett, who recently retired as the clerk of circuit courts. And what they have equipment specifically for people with low vision. They have equipment for people who have they're hard of hearing or who cannot hear, they can bring in, you know, an ASL interpreter. Some of the courtrooms actually are completely accessible for wheelchairs and anything else you can think of. And when they do that, if the courtroom that it was originally assigned to, that the case was originally assigned to, is not accessible, they switch it, they move it over to the court that is. And that's what should be happening in schools too, so that there's not this waste of time. I'm really pleased that Milwaukee County is doing that. Now, Title II is different. Title II doesn't give anybody any wiggle room. It says very clearly that all governments are mandated to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act in their programs and their facilities. And in 1993, all governments were supposed to start a transition plan. And what that means is a written plan that says, here are our priorities, and we're going to start working on these. Nobody expected this to happen overnight, but we're going to start working on these. We're going to start making things ready to be compliant or making them compliant. And some of the stuff that should have happened never did, because there was no follow-up by the government on whether those plans actually existed. And what I have found is that next to nobody has a plan. I use the open records law, and I ask for it. And I so far have only gotten one or two. And they're not from cities in Wisconsin or from the state of Wisconsin. But at least there's somebody out there trying. I mean, it's obvious we have to do local governments like cities, villages, counties, and state government, but there's also special districts, and that might be like a sewage district or water treatment district. And, you know, City of Milwaukee has one, City of South Milwaukee has one. It also involves schools. Schools are considered government entities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this requires that schools, as a government entity, has to come into compliance with the ADA. What I found in 2018, MATC at the Oak Creek campus had no accessible restrooms. Now that's pretty simple, but 2018. So I showed up at one of their meetings and handed them my complaint to the Department of Justice that they didn't have any, and they didn't, not for students, not for staff, not for faculty, and not for the public. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that was still happening. But as we all know, it does. If schools complied with this, there would be far less need for students to request an accommodation. They wouldn't have to. It would be like the Milwaukee County court system. There would be stuff available that can be moved to where the student is, you know, whatever the classroom is, or anything like that. Libraries. The Hales Corners Library is finally getting an elevator. They have programs for kids on the first floor and the second floor. And I think they even had some in the basement, but for years, I mean, they have not had an elevator, and they keep using the excuse that it costs too much. And yet what they're doing is turning away kids with who use wheelchairs and anybody who cannot use stairs. And that's illegal, but they do it, and there's no follow-up. It's
Hey,
very,
Dorothy. Hey, Dorothy.
yeah.
This is Ramsey. I'm sorry. Did you say that MATC in Oak Creek had no accessible restrooms?
That's right.
Okay.
Now they do now. They do now.
Yeah.
I know somebody that works there, Ramsey, Dick Simon, or at least he used to work there. I'm gonna have to get with him and ask him what's going on.
After the meeting, if I could have your contact info,
Mhm.
how can people from Wisconsin help you with this? Because I really want to help you, not just as a private citizen, because I really want to help you because it's so.
And I love the help. We all have to say things when we see a problem. But what happened when I brought that complaint to MATC, the board responded pretty quickly. Within 6 weeks, they had found $600,000 to put in new restrooms, a whole set of new restrooms. And those are in now. And they're available. They're, you know, they're usable by everybody. So I talked to people who went there, who went to MATC in Oak Creek in the 90s, and they brought up the problem. And then in, you know, the 2000s, they brought up the problem, and nobody did anything about it because they didn't have to. But the good thing was that the Department of Education came in with their lawyers and with their experts, and they did an assessment, and they found other problems. So they added those to the restroom list. And MATC had to give them a report, and the report ended up being very thick. I think it's about an inch thick. They had to have photographs and all that kind of stuff of what they have done. So that's been taken care of. There still are a lot of other problems at MATC and throughout the system, but it's better.
Can Dorothy, can I ask another question? I'm sorry. You said something about library not having an elevator. Which library is that? Can you tell me?
It's in Hales Corners.
Do they have an elevator today?
No, but it's in the budget. And that's the first, that's a good step. What I'm doing, and I'll send you the information on this too. I'm sending a letter to everybody on the city council, thanking them for doing this. I don't want to criticize them at this point because they're finally doing it. But I'm going to send them a letter, and I will, I'll send you that information. I can send you a sample of a letter, and you can do it as an email if you want. I think I'm pretty sure I have all their email addresses. Sometimes I prefer to send a paper letter, sometimes email, sometimes both. It just depends. But I think they would really appreciate it if people said, hey, this is great. You know, this is wonderful.
I don't need
Information.
I don't mean to be a conflict of interest, but I would encourage you to go to the governance committee meeting tomorrow, because we're gonna have a representative from the Department of Education there. I will send the info over to you if I could have your email. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. I have your name marked on my sheet, and you already gave us the your email, so that'll work great. All right, so we know now
Dorothy?
governments.
Dorothy,
Yes,
can you send it to me as well as
Sure.
the DJ Larry Love one? I'm kind of interested. And like I said, I know somebody that works at the South Campus. So this is what I'm hearing on this meeting is very, very intriguing indeed. I didn't know that MATC took so long as something as simple as physical access to bathrooms.
Especially when students have complained about it.
I just can't believe we're 30 years in and HR 620 rules the roost still. And we're
Yeah.
still not getting our acts together to help and doing for humanity what we ought to be doing. We should be doing this because we see a value in it. We shouldn't be doing it because there's a law.
Yeah,
Anyway, I don't want to go on my
Well,
soapbox, but you know,
it's a good
yeah.
soapbox. It's a good soapbox. And you're right, because there are not people with an understanding of disabilities part of the governing boards that make these decisions. And what I found, and years ago, back in the 80s, I was actually on the MATC board, and I really didn't find much improvement when I showed up in 2018. But as a problem with this, there is no overarching kind of, well, we are going to make our facilities and programs ADA compliant. They didn't even know about that when I talked with the attorney. And I was shocked, and so were they. They didn't know about Title II. So I did some more checking. Now there's not an organization, there's an entity in Madison. It's called the Milwaukee College Technical System. And what it is, it's like an umbrella organization for all the technical colleges. So what that entity is supposed to do is make sure that a standard of quality and consistency in classes and things like that happens. I have written to them twice, and they've responded in the last 2 years. I asked them for information specifically about a copy of their plan for Title II. And remember that Title II, we have to keep saying that, but I wanted a copy of their plan. I wanted a copy of the budget that showed how much money they were spending for ADA compliance, both programs and facilities. What I got back from them was their employee handbook. Totally off the mark. And that bothers me because it's been 30 years. Where have they been all this time? So
Somebody's dragging their feet, Dorothy.
absolutely.
Spend the money. That's the whole thing. And then they're giving you the runaround besides.
But I truly believe they do not know what Title II is. They know what Title I is, but Title II, and there's a reason for that. Title II was not funded. And that means that public education, even just getting the information out to governments, it doesn't happen. There is no office. The only way that you can enforce Title II, if everybody refuses to listen, is to take them to court.
Oh my
And
God. And this is just common sense, Dorothy. Some of this is
Absolutely.
just plain old common sense. Do love others as God has loved you. What further proof do we need, Dorothy, to do what we ought to be doing today?
Hey, I agree with you completely. What this tells me is that there's a couple things we can do, but a lawsuit costs at least $20,000 just to file the paperwork. And that is without even doing any meetings and going to court and stuff like that. That's too expensive. If you have to do that to get restrooms at a school, people can't afford that. And I'll get to that later on to explain a little bit more about what I think we need to do. So we've got Title II, everybody's mandated. And this is why this is important. Title II is a proactive approach, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It's exactly. If the accessible buildings and programs for everyone are already there, they don't have to request like request an accessible restroom. How many people are going to wait for a restroom to be built? I can't imagine that. But that means that any request they have,
Go to the bathroom.
there's no waiting. There's no waiting. So that would mean like, you know, hearing loops and special equipment like the courts have would be there, and the schools would have it, and libraries would have it, and any governmental entity would have it. And one of the biggest things that's a problem, public meetings. Public meetings are difficult. They have everything from steps to bad acoustics, and then in between. And then they very rarely make it easy to get an ASL interpreter. So I want this to happen. I want the stuff done in advance. And that's ultimately what I'm pushing for. What this does, once these things become, normal, they're part of what you expect. You expect there to be alternatives to steps. You expect there to be accessible restrooms. It normalizes inclusion. That's important. There's no longer nobody's going to start complaining about, oh, those parking spots. They get them because they're whiners. And we know that's not true. But that's the problem when you have individual accommodations, like an individual accommodation for somebody who's pregnant and can't stand all day. It becomes that's sort of a stigma as being special. It's not special. It's leveling the playing field so that that person can work. I want to see us normalize inclusion. That's what I want to go for, the inclusion part. So we need to do this. And I have a bunch of reasons on why the government's the place to start. Anyway, so we need to talk about policy and issues. Policy is the umbrella. And I mentioned that, with the technical college system. The issues are a whole range of things. And I'll use an example of a safe street crossing. We've all had the problem. We've all had the problem, but the policy say it's adopted by the city council, and they say, we want a safe street crossing here by this school. Okay, how do they get it? They have to come up with ideas on exactly how to do it. You can't just say, well, the street is safe, because it's not. Most aren't. So some of the suggestions that come up are that it has to be well marked, with paint and all that. There have to be curb cuts, maybe a crossing guard, maybe stop signs, maybe a traffic light. And each of those is a different color. There also has to be snow removal, nothing blocking the view so that people can safely get across the street. And maybe it'll reduce on-street parking. And there may be more. And these are the issues that are related to the policy. Whoops. We're going to have to go through this. Now I'm lost. I'm sorry. I will figure this out. Oh, let's see. Yeah, you get to see my next slides before I even talk about them. I'm sorry. I should have had this done better, but I'm learning, and thank you for letting me learn. But these issues are all individual ways to make sure that this is really safe. And I'm sure there's stuff I'm missing that wouldn't be talked about, and not all these things would need to be done. But if you're going to make it safe for people, you've got to have it safe for everybody. You don't just make it safe for people who can walk up and down curbs, for people who, for people who do not use mobility devices. You have to make it accessible for everybody. And then it becomes normal. It becomes the thing everybody expects. Now, the curb cuts, those are at the point where they're normalized, where they include lots of people, more than people who use wheelchairs, far more. People with any kind of loads to move, those curb cuts are fantastic. because they can move a dolly up and down, or a hand truck up and down those curb cuts. And nobody thought about that when they put the curb cuts in. But that's the thing that's so neat about it, because you learn how everyone is going to use it, and they do. So the curb cuts are never going to be a big deal. They're not going to be a big concern about money and stuff, because everybody just takes it. It's normal. Take it for granted.
Except to maintain it.
Yeah, and maintaining it's not any different in terms of money from maintaining the rest of the sidewalk or the rest of the
Yeah.
curb. And
Well,
that's a good thing.
Me and Mark have seen blockages of our wheelchairs because there's cracks and potholes and little thingies in
Mhm.
them. And the city replies, well, we'll forward your complaint. Well, 2 weeks later, snow removal is an issue. And on and on. Yeah, they can have it, the infrastructure, but if they don't maintain it so it's usable, what's the point?
Exactly. There's always this disconnect between we know what needs to be done right. We know what we have to do, but then it doesn't follow through. There are ways to fix that. And it's going to involve some money, but I don't see a problem with that. It's
Hey,
money,
Dorothy,
it's money.
Dorothy,
Oh, sorry.
this is Ramsey.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. I, I was wondering how we can help you as individuals.
Yeah,
With, 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 with some of your projects that you're working on. I know you worked on stuff back in the 90s, but what are some of the current projects you're working on today?
yeah. And do you know Dr. Elizabeth Watson? She seems to know a lot about universal accessibility.
Who
And
who is she and where is she?
she worked as a director out of Center for Students with Disabilities at University of Wisconsin Whitewater.
Oh, okay. And her last
And
name
I know
is
her
Watson?
like Inspector Watson. Watson, Watson.
Got it.
Elizabeth
Okay.
is her first name. She's good.
That's there are more and more architects and contractors, not a lot, very few, but who are becoming educated about what needs to be done. And this has been a long battle. And again, I could talk for a couple of hours, but you'd probably get bored stiff because I'd start sounding the same. Anyway, I like the proactive aspect of Title II, because once the government starts actually seriously putting ADA compliance into effect, the public's going to notice because it's going to cost money. And then what happens is people start to talk about it, and they're going to say a lot of stupid things, but there's also going to be people, like us, who are going to say the things that make the difference, that are important. And then what's important about it is that this is how we make our society inclusive. And I can't stress that enough, that the word inclusive is now become a part of the language that a lot of society understands. And because they understand it, we need to use it, because that's really what we're talking about. People with disabilities come from all walks of life, all levels of income, you name it, all races, all creeds. As you know, I mean, anybody can be a member of the club, and they may join next week. They may have joined at birth. They may have joined when they were, I don't know, 20. And all of that stuff matters. It matters a great deal, because those people, especially the ones between 18 and, I don't know, between 18 and maybe going into a nursing home. Those are the people that I want to get. I want to get them motivated and get them voting for and asking for ADA compliance. And when we do that, then we normalize it. And that's what's so important about government, because it's a good use of tax money to come into compliance with the ADA. It's a good use of tax money to give an example to every single business in the state that this is what needs to be done. And this is going to be normal. So let me talk about specifically about the state of Wisconsin, because that's what I'm focusing on. These are the three things I know about best about what are not in compliance. And it might be just a little thing, but a little thing is usually a symptom of something much larger and that there are other problems. Now, there was a woman who wanted to work for the DNR, Department of Natural Resources, and she went online and found that their website was not accessible. She then started looking at a whole lot of other department websites. She found at least 40 that were not accessible. That's, I mean, you're withholding public information from people by not being accessible. So right now there is a group, there's some tech people and some other folks that are looking at how do we make these websites accessible and how soon can we do it and all that stuff. But the only reason they're doing it, it's not because she found the stuff, it's because media picked it up. And it was embarrassing to say that none of the websites were accessible. So then they took it seriously and they started doing it. So the website thing, I think we can be comfortable with that right now. Department of Motor Vehicles is a different issue. Department of Motor Vehicles, and I'll give you a couple examples. About, I think 2, maybe 3 years ago, at the West Bend DMV office, a woman came in to renew her license, and she came with her husband and with her cane. And for some reason, the counter clerk said, you have to walk without your cane to prove that you can get a renewed license. And she and her husband both said, that doesn't make any difference in how she drives. She's perfectly capable of doing that. She hasn't got any accidents. But the counter clerk said, you got to do it. And the counter clerks have too much authority. They are not health professionals. They are clerks. And those are the people that you talk to, you know, when you're going to get your license renewed. She did it because she was told that she would not get a license if she didn't do it. She did it. She fell. She broke her wrist. It took a year for the Department of Motor Vehicles to put something in their training materials saying, if somebody's using a mobility device, don't ask them to not use it. So, finally, it took them a year to put that in the training materials. It should not take that long. It should have been planned in advance. It should have been in there so that woman didn't break her wrist. And
Hey, Dorothy,
yeah,
this is Ramsey. I'm so sorry for interrupting. I want to know what are some of the things you're working on today, not years ago, but how can people first help you today?
oh, I have plenty. I like talking about the ones that are done because it just feels good to know that something happened. But it also makes me frustrated that there isn't more happening. But yeah, I've got stuff that you can help right away. The DMV, and this is something that is current, the DMV also has in their training materials that the counter clerks are supposed to look for signs of bipolar disorder, depression, stimming. What on earth for? And besides, the counter clerks have maybe what, 3 to 5 minutes with each person. This is wrong because I mean, you all know why. There's no reason. If a person can drive safely, what difference does it make if they use stimming to keep themselves calm? I mean, we all have little habits. I mean, like the person that is standing in line who's fiddling with their keys in their pocket. Maybe it's stimming, maybe it's not. Who knows? Whatever it is, they like doing it. And I've seen all kinds of people do that. Some people like to click ballpoint pens.
How does that relate to driving?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's something that that I'm working on right now, trying to figure out what's in the statutes, what's in their policies and procedures, what needs to be changed, and then, you know, who to go to
Okay,
Make 'em-
okay, that's perfect. Could, could you and I connect offline because I have some con- contacts at the DMV and DOT. Uh,
Yeah,
and also, we've got a governor's committee meeting tomorrow, and maybe you would be wonderful for public comment period. So I I sent Sydney the do the email,
Yeah.
so maybe she can forward it to you.
yeah, just send me information, you know, whenever you can, just send me information.
Okay, well, what's a good email address and way to get a hold of you?
You'll get it. Yeah, I've got yours, and before I leave, you'll have mine.
Okay.
Okay, so then the building code. This is something that I thought was perfect to invite experts to help with things like universal design. Experts in plumbing who actually also know the ADA. And this is where ADA coordinators come in valuably. However, the building code right now includes a couple of sentences that allow the state of Wisconsin to grant ADA exemptions. That means the state of Wisconsin is giving itself the authority to undermine the ADA. Now, we all know that you can't do that. That's a federal law. The ADA is a federal civil rights law, and you can't do that. The Constitution has what's called a supremacy clause, and the supremacy clause says that federal law is the law of the land. Well, where did this thing come from? Nobody knows, but that's another story. What I'm trying to do is I have been trying for 3 years to get through to somebody at the state of Wisconsin that this has to change, because what happened is the state of Wisconsin, the department that oversees the building code, gave an ADA exemption to the city of Burlington. Now that's one criminal act, that's one illegal act. But what the city of Burlington was told they have to do, they were told the city council has to vote to approve this. That voting to approve it is illegal. It's unconstitutional. And there should be no way that elected officials are told it's okay to do this. And their own attorney, the city attorney, his name is John Logic. He told them that they had every legal right to vote to undermine the ADA, but they didn't talk about it as undermining the ADA. They talked about it as approving this illegal ADA exemption. The state of Wisconsin has the building code in its entirety in the statutes. That means that the legislature voted to approve it, voted to approve this ADA exemption, and then the governor signed it, and it was the governor from the previous administration. They all broke the law. Plus, because they're elected officials, they take an oath of office. And the oath of office said they will uphold the US Constitution and the Wisconsin Constitution. They have broken their oath of office. And as far as I'm concerned, they have broken faith with the people of Wisconsin. And how did this happen? Well, I don't know yet for sure, but I think it has a lot to do with just ignorance of the ADA. And there's no excuse for that. The state has plenty of attorneys, but it's ignorance, and it's also, who cares? You know, it's not a big deal. Nobody's made a fuss about it. And that's part of what I do. I make a fuss. And any people who want to join me making a fuss, I love it. I absolutely love it. So that's one of the things I'm working on now. And 3 years is too long. So I have talked to people. I have made phone calls. I have written letters. I have sent emails. I get almost no response. And I'll tell you about one response that I got. And this is a letter from the department that oversees that piece of the building code. The deputy director for the department sent me a letter. I'm always very careful about getting stuff either on video or in writing. I've been using this when I talk to anybody. What he said is, well, we think inclusion is nice. And these are my words. These are not, that's sort of an interpretation of his. But that inclusion is great, well and good. We think it's nice. But we provide for people with disabilities in a different way. That sounds like separate but equal to me. And separate but equal was thrown out in 1954 with a Supreme Court, a US Supreme Court decision. There is no such thing as separate and equal. It does not exist. And the fact that they're even using that tells me they have no clue what the Americans with Disabilities Act is about. It's about inclusion. It's not about separate treatment, which generally means no treatment for people with disabilities. The other thing he said is they're going to keep giving out these illegal exemptions. So I have been trying, and I'll keep trying. They just make me more angry. So what I think ultimately we're going to have to do, because I can deal with each of these three, any of us could. We could take them on, but do you know how many other departments there are in the state of Wisconsin? I don't. There's lots of them. We could take on each one separately, but that takes a lot of time and effort. And I would rather keep going up the food chain and look at a policy for the state of Wisconsin. I want that umbrella for the state of Wisconsin. It does not exist. Every year, the state of Wisconsin, like every other government, puts out a proclamation or a resolution saying, hey, this is the ADA anniversary for the 25th, the 26th, 27th, 32nd, but they don't go any further than that. And what I want to see is I want to see the state of Wisconsin, the legislature, adopt a policy that says we support and we follow compliance with the ADA and especially the mandates in Title II. Title II, remember, that's governments. We don't have that. And the only state that I know of that does is California. I have been dealing with lots of people in lots of states, and nobody seems to care. It's like everybody put this on the back burner behind the back burner.
Hey,
That's
Dorothy,
wrong.
this is Randy again. I'm sorry.
Hi.
Do you have a website for your organization?
I'm sorry. I didn't hear that.
He was.
Does,
Let me go ahead, Ramsey.
does your organization have a website?
Yes, we do. It's in the process. This organization is run on very little money. And I have not been able to come up with somebody who can handle the website. So we keep adding to it, but it's not available to the public. Hopefully by the end of the week, it will. But COVID really hurt us in terms of moving forward. And that was one of the things that kind of got sidetracked. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff we could put on there too. Yeah, well, whatever. I promise. And Ramsey, you don't have to keep apologizing for anything. So what I'm talking about is an umbrella for the state of Wisconsin that promotes a society of inclusion. That means people with disabilities and every marginalized group that has anything to do with disabilities. That's the healthiest for our democracy. It's the healthiest for all of us. And there's plenty of good reasons for that, but I could take another couple hours. Anyway, so that we need a policy at the state level, because then we don't have to do the whack-a-mole thing, you know, where you go after stuff in the Department of Justice, where you go after stuff in the DMV. There will be an overarching policy. Somebody got their microphone on? Because
Let's see.
I think it's okay now.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so if we do that, if we have a policy of inclusion, then all of this stuff can come under that. And you can see Department of Motor Vehicles and Building Code aren't really done yet. They won't be done for a long time. So what the state has to do is adopt the ADA, and especially the mandates in Title II. That kind of adoption with money attached to it is going to make all the difference. It's got to have money attached to it. And there should be a plan for every single department. What is your department going to do to come into compliance with the ADA? And there are so many big things and little things, and all of those matter, whether they're big or little. Doesn't take a genius to figure out all of those matter to people with disabilities, and to people that nobody thinks of as people with disabilities. Like, I've got a soccer injury from when I was, I don't know, 28. And that means that I have never been able to walk right, and I've never been able to run since then. And I had to give up my dream of someday seeing the Grand Canyon even. And then I have my right knee, I had 4 surgeries on it to get an implant. Now, you know, implants are normal now. You can get hips and elbows and knees, but mine didn't work. And because of that, I have to wear a brace. But it also slows me down a little more. But it means I can't do steps, and I haven't been able to for 20 years. People like that, it took me 10 years, I think, before I finally thought, wait a minute, I have a disability. And I had never really thought about that before, because it didn't seem to matter. But I mean, I could tell you about times I fell off curbs because I just, you know, going along the way I used to years before. And, you know, you don't even think about the curb. And I wasn't thinking about the curb, and I fell down. That's not healthy. But it also means that I started looking much more closely at what sorts of other things were barriers for me that I just didn't even think of, because I just walked around them, basically. So what I am really talking about is the policy. We need to have that policy saying we are going to support the ADA, we are going to follow the mandates in Title II, and we are going to work for a society of inclusion. Then you start pulling in the crayons, all of those things. And that's where it becomes so critical that we have people who understand things like universal design. And I think that, you know, if any of you disagree with me, tell me why, and tell me where I'm making mistakes, because that makes a big difference. So our catchphrase is public policy for real people. Real people is all of us. It's not a question of trying to make an argument for the value of people with disabilities, because that is unquestionable. This is for all of us, and it'll help people who maybe don't have a disability now, but will have. And I just found out last December, I have a lung disease that never quits. And I only have 40% of my lungs left, which is really good to have Zoom, because then I don't have to figure out how to get to meetings and stuff. And I don't have to worry about parking and all the rest of it. But that's the kind of stuff that we need to talk more and think more about, how we can use technology to make it possible for us to participate. And I'm doing 2 more sessions in September. And both of those, one of them is going to be hybrid, one of them is going to be Zoom. And I appreciate it because I can participate in it. I'm going to be talking about civic engagement. So that, and what I find is nobody really knows what I'm talking about until they talk about it. Because this is a different way of looking at things. It's a different way of saying, we're not just being nice to people. You know, that's the phrase, oh, I can't think of it now. I should write it down. But that's, we're talking about rights. Yeah, rights, not charity. The ADA is not a list of nice things to do for people with disabilities. It is not a list of nice things to do.
Mhm.
When you have money, when you feel like it, when somebody raises a fuss. The ADA is federal civil rights legislation. And that's it, period. You got to do it. And there's a reason for it. There were people who blood, sweat, and tears for decades. And then they finally get the law passed, and we're not that much better off. We just aren't.
Yeah.
Unless people know about the law, they have no clue. So that's part of the other thing. I want to see more public education. All right, so this is my information.
Looks like some people are raising their hand.
Oh yeah, I see hands. I see Ramsey and Lawrence.
Yep.
And just remember, Ramsey, you do not have to apologize. Maybe I'll interrupt you or something. But yeah, I'd love to have questions. I'd love to have suggestions.
Something as simple as 504 on websites.
Yes, that's a good idea. I'll put, yeah.
Brain readers and JAWS can read. JAWS can read this aloud to a user who needs it.
Mm-hmm.
Zoom text, anybody can use Zoom text 504 compliant. It just enlarges text, but have JAWS read it, or even Adobe Acrobat, you need standards like 504 compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And the other question I had real quick is there such a thing as Title VI? Because Milwaukee County Transit System's bus service keeps referring to a Title VI complaint, whatever that is.
Well,
And-
you know, the Transit Plus system,
Oh,
that's going to be phasing out because the transit system believes at this point they've got coverage with the regular buses. And I haven't really dug into that much, but yeah, there is a thing on transportation, and transportation has changed a bit too. I have a friend actually who's he's part of a railroad group. People who just love riding on subways and railroads. And
Mhm.
we all know Amtrak does not have full coverage of accessible trains or accessible stations. And
Yeah.
that's something that his group is working on. So that's a group that I'm talking with. Bicyclists, the Wisconsin Bicycle Federation. Somebody's got a microphone that's making it hard for me. But the Wisconsin Bicycle Federation is also very interested in the safe streets issue. I have been talking with them as well, because if we're going to increase political power, we have to draw in as many organizations as possible to go with us and say, look, this is our issue too. We need, and you see this stuff in the paper about bicyclists who are just out, in a group, very visible, and somebody in a car will hit them. And we've had that in Wisconsin, where there's been at least 4 people that have been killed in the last few years. And that's just wrong. It's very wrong. And what I think, Lawrence, you mentioned about chunks of concrete that don't exist, that should exist, that all that sort of stuff, it matters to people who are using sidewalks or even the roadway, the edge of the roadway. And that might be people with a cane, with a walker, somebody with a baby buggy. There's a lot of people that would be affected by it.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that I wanted to mention, and I'll make this my last one so that you can just ask me whatever you want. Wisconsin prison system is way overcrowded, even in comparison to the other prison systems in the country. Wisconsin's is way overcrowded. It doesn't, I mean, let other people talk about why it is, why it's overcrowded, like why people are being put into it to begin with. What I'm interested in the fact that the ADA does cover prisons. Prisons are government entities. There are people in prisons, and I've been working with a couple of different groups on prison populations for the last couple of years. And it's a slow process, but what I have found is there are people like a younger man who's in his 30s who can't hear. And they changed the way that the movies are shown to not have closed captions anymore. So that got changed back. He actually did it. I much prefer the self-advocacy route because now he can tell other people. But he got it changed, and he got it changed back to, so now there's closed captions. But I'm looking at the population that's age 65 and over. Those are the people that might be until they die. That's entirely a possibility. Among those people, you know as well as I do that they have mobility problems, they may have diabetes, they may have all those kinds of things that come with aging. Those are covered by the ADA. And certainly the conditions that they're surrounded with in that prison, those are covered by the ADA. So what I'd like to do is and I'm talking with Wisdom, and I got a meeting set up, I think, with Expo and with IWalk. And those are 3 different groups that are working statewide on prison population and reducing that population. So one thing I think could be done is let's use the ADA and let's improve the situation for people over 65. Then we can say, all right, let's expand it to the whole population. But at least I think we can use it initially to get people who are older out of that prison and begin reducing population that way. Especially if you got people that are ill, that are not mobile anymore. What's the point in keeping them in prison? Prisons are supposed to be for rehabilitation, not punishment. And it doesn't make sense to me to do anything else. And I think mental health is an issue that is very serious. I think, there's policies and procedures that need to be created so that people who have disabilities actually get treated humanely. And that's really what it boils down to. So I'm really hoping on that. There was a situation where there was an elevator out of commission. I don't remember. I think it might've been Fox Lake. I'm not sure. But the elevator was out of commission. And that was the only way that people on the like the second level could get down to the first level, which is where the recreation and meals were served. And they couldn't. There were no steps. Well, there were steps, but they couldn't use the steps. And there are people there who need wheelchairs, can't get wheelchairs. There are people who would be happy with a cane and they can't get those either. They have to really go through a lot of hoops to do it. And that's wrong. And that elevator was out of commission. And as far as I know, it still is, but it was like at least 2 months last time I checked. 2 months, and they have to sit in their cells to eat. That is just wrong. It's morally wrong. And we shouldn't allow it. It's our tax dollars that are paying for that. So that's a longer term project, but I think it's incredibly worthwhile, because if we can get that population down, great. Because there's at least 800 people statewide that are over age 65. And that would make a difference. And it would give other people hope, and it would show them that it can be done. So, we've got the Bike Federation, and there's a group of motorcyclists, all of whom are amputees. And I don't know how they became amputees, but I think all of them are missing at least one leg. And I just think that's great. I mean, I've never seen a group like that with so many blades as they have. It's wonderful. But that's another group. And they routinely will get individual things handled that they need to have handled for motorcycling. So that's another one. You got the bikers, the bicyclists, and you've got the prison advocates. There's a lot of people that we could be making connections with. Oh yeah, and I'm sorry. I just thought of one that I got on the back burner. The League of Wisconsin Municipalities, which is it's an organization of municipalities throughout the state. They join, they get technical assistance, things like that. They also get insurance to cover any kinds of problems on public property and things like that. The insurance salespeople are very concerned about ADA lawsuits. And those cost money and the insurer has to pay for it. So I think we've got another really large group of people